The moment I walked through the door, everything froze. The low hum of conversation, the clink of cups, the warmth of the afternoon sun filtering through the window, it all seemed to blur out. My gaze landed on her first. Deborah. Sitting in the corner booth like it was any other day, as if we hadn't spent the last 2 years building a life together. As if she hadn't just been my entire world. But it wasn't just her that stopped my breath. No, it was him. Jared. I hadn't expected to see him. We were at that point in our relationship where everything seemed settled, almost too settled. We were planning the wedding, choosing colors, and picking venues. And yet, as I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The sight of them, together, laughing, casually sharing a moment, sent a chill down my spine, but it wasn't the rage I expected. It wasn't the anger that had been building inside me for days now, ever since the small, seemingly insignificant moments had started to stack up like cards in a house of lies. No, what I felt was something colder. An emptiness. Her hand rested on his. It was subtle, but it was there. Her fingers twined with his, like they were two people who hadn't spent years apart. Like they were more than just the past trying to resurface, more than the ghost of something that should have stayed buried. I didn't rush over. I didn't shout, didn't demand an explanation. I just stood there, in the doorway of the cafe, frozen in place by the coldness that spread through me. I had always believed that when the moment came, when betrayal hit, I would feel it in my chest, would feel the sharp, searing pain, the heat of it all. But instead, I stood there, numb. And I realized something then, something that sent a wave of discomfort over me. The anger wasn't coming. I didn't feel the rage that I should have. I didn't feel any of the things I had imagined would happen if I ever found them together like this. All I felt was, nothing. It was as if I were observing someone else's life. Like I was watching from a distance, unable to reach in, unable to make any of it real. I thought I would want answers, but all I wanted to do was leave, to walk out and let it all fade into the background like a forgotten memory. But I didn't leave. I couldn't leave. I stayed rooted in place, watching her laugh. The sound of her voice, a voice I had once loved, that had always comforted me, sounded hollow now. It was all too much. Too perfect. Too real. As they exchanged a quiet word, a smile passing between them, I had a sickening realization. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't just something I could talk through, something we could patch up. No. This was the beginning of the end. But even as the thought surfaced in my mind, all I felt was that cold emptiness. And that, more than anything, terrified me. Growing up, I never understood the kind of pain other people talked about when they spoke of love. I suppose I was naive, sheltered in a way. My mother made sure of that. It wasn't that she shielded me from the realities of the world, quite the opposite. She'd never once sugar-coated things, never pretended that life was a fairy tale. But she always made sure I knew that love was something solid, something you could count on. The kind of love that didn't fade away or disappear when life got hard. I remember one night, when I was maybe 10, watching her clean up after dinner, wiping down the kitchen counters as if everything in the world could be fixed by a clean surface. Her movements were methodical, calm. I remember asking her about Dad. Where he went. Why did he left? I'd never gotten a real answer, and I'd never asked too many times, but that night, something in me just needed to know. He left because he couldn't figure out how to love us, she said softly, still scrubbing. But that doesn't mean love isn't real. I remember the way she said it, soft, not bitter, not angry. Just matter of fact. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. It was as if she had made peace with the pain of losing him, and all I could think was, how could someone not love us? It was then I made a promise to myself, I will always be someone who believes in love. Because I saw it in her, the way she carried on, raising me with nothing but her strength and her heart. No matter what happened, no matter how hard things got, love didn't leave. It stayed. It had to. That belief stayed with me through my teenage years, when everything seemed to be in a constant state of change. My mother's stability, her unwavering conviction that love was all you needed, became my guiding principle. When I met Sarah in high school, I carried that belief with me like a shield. Sarah and I had that perfect teenage romance, one of those relationships that felt like it could last forever. I'd taken her to prom, held her hand when we went on our first real date, and spent hours talking about our futures. She was the kind of girl who made me feel seen, understood. In the beginning, it was all so easy. She'd laugh at my dumb jokes, and I'd smile back at her like she was the only person in the world. But then came the night I found out about her betrayal. It wasn't like the movies. There was no big confrontation, no angry shouting. I walked into her room one evening, found her with my best friend, Michael. They weren't doing anything explicit, they were just sitting there, too close, with a kind of familiarity that I hadn't seen between them before. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, at least not in the way you'd think. It was the realization that she'd kept it from me, the silence between us after everything we'd shared. That was the moment that shattered my belief in love. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Sarah, the girl I thought I would marry someday, had tossed it all aside for someone else, someone I'd trusted. The shock wasn't in the act itself, it was in how easily they both seemed to carry it. Like it meant nothing. We broke up, of course. But the damage had been done. My heart was shattered, yes, but it was the idea of love that broke along with it. The idea that love was something you could rely on, something constant, something that wasn't just words but actions. I lost that belief in that moment. And for years after, I carried a quiet bitterness with me, a hesitation to trust, to let myself be vulnerable in the same way I once had. That's when I met Deborah. I was 24, still recovering from Sarah's betrayal, still trying to reconcile the idea of love with the reality that people could lie, cheat, and walk away without a second thought. But Deborah was different. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't in a rush to define anything, but she made me feel seen again in a way I hadn't felt in years. She listened when I spoke, and she didn't try to fix things, she just understood. She offered a gentleness I hadn't expected but welcomed. With her, it felt like I could let go, finally. I could put down the shield I'd been holding up for so long. At first, it was easy. Our relationship was effortless. She seemed to believe in the kind of love I wanted, something constant, something strong. We shared a vision for the future, building plans around each other, talking about a future we could create. I'd almost forgotten about the scars of my past, the ways that betrayal had twisted my perception of love. She was my anchor, the one who brought me back to that version of myself, the one I had buried after Sarah. But slowly, over time, things began to slip away. Deborah changed, though she didn't let on at first. She became distant, subtly at first, and then with increasing regularity. She was still there, but her heart seemed to be somewhere else. I chalked it up to work stress, or maybe the pressure of planning a wedding, but I should have known better. The signs were there. I just chose to ignore them. It wasn't until I walked into that cafe, until I saw her with Jared again, that I realized what had been happening all along. The deep-seated fear of abandonment, of betrayal, that had shaped so much of my adult life, it all came rushing back. And for the first time, I understood the true cost of putting my trust in someone else. Deborah wasn't just another Sarah. But she wasn't the person I thought she was either. And maybe that's the hardest thing to accept, that the people you give your heart to, no matter how much you believe in them, are always capable of something you can't predict, something that shatters the world you've built in your mind. I'd always thought loyalty was a choice. But now, I'm beginning to see it's something deeper. It's a kind of blind faith. And maybe that's what I'd lost all along, my faith. Not in people, but in love itself. When I first met Deborah, it felt like fate. I was at a crossroads in my life, bruised from my past but unwilling to let it define me. She wasn't just a breath of fresh air, she was a calm breeze after a storm. She made everything feel easier. The way she smiled when she saw me, the way she listened when I spoke, it was the kind of attention I hadn't realized I was craving. I was used to being the one to hold things together, to always be the steady presence in my relationships. But with her, I could finally let go. She was confident without being arrogant, kind without being naive. She seemed to have the world figured out in ways I never could. And in a way, that drew me in even more. She was everything I had been looking for, someone who felt like they knew who they were, someone who was sure of themselves and what they wanted. Someone who didn't need fixing. We had talked about our pasts early on. I was careful to keep the conversation light when it came to relationships, but with her, I felt like I could open up. She told me she had been in a long relationship before, one that had ended after a couple of years. She didn't go into details, and I didn't press. I didn't need to know more, I could see the way her eyes darkened for a moment when the subject was broached. I had my own scars to hide, and I didn't need to dwell on the past. But it wasn't long before I started to notice the cracks. Small things at first. Deborah wasn't the kind of person who was outwardly cold or distant, but there was something about her that made me question myself, made me feel like I wasn't enough. At first, it was her need for space. I was used to my relationships being close-knit, a kind of constant connection that seemed unspoken but understood. But Deborah, though she was affectionate, wasn't in a rush to connect all the time. There were weekends when she would retreat into her world, catching up on work or seeing friends that I hadn't met yet. It wasn't that I minded the idea of her having her own life outside of me, I had always respected independence in a partner. But I began to notice that when we were together, something was always just off, like she wasn't fully present. And it wasn't just about time spent together. It was the way she talked about the future. Early on, when we were just getting to know each other, I'd casually ask about plans for the next year, or the next couple of years. I was curious about how she envisioned things. But she always dodged those questions with a laugh, a change of subject, or a comment about not worrying too much about the future. Her nonchalance unsettled me. I wanted to be the kind of person who could take things day by day, but I needed some stability. I needed to know we were building something real. Deborah, it seemed, was more comfortable with ambiguity, and that started to create a slow burn of frustration inside me. The more I tried to anchor her, to create a sense of permanence, the more she pulled away. The more I began to feel like I was chasing a ghost. Still, I wasn't ready to let go. I told myself that it was just a phase, that maybe we both just needed time to adjust to being together in a more serious way. We had a few big conversations about what we wanted from the relationship, and Deborah was always open, always willing to talk through things. But when we would sit together, face to face, I started to feel like I wasn't really seeing her anymore. Like the version of her I had fallen for was slipping away, slipping out of my grasp, and I wasn't sure how to hold on. And then came the distance between us. It wasn't physical, not at first, but emotional. Deborah started to retreat into herself, sharing less, laughing less. It wasn't that she was being cruel or cold. But her subtle withdrawal was like the soft closing of a door. She would still reach out to me, still make an effort to see me, but the moments when I felt truly connected to her became fewer and farther between. Instead of feeling closer, we started to feel more like strangers. Like we were two people who had once known each other well, but had forgotten how to speak the same language. The thing was, I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to acknowledge that things were changing between us. I had been burned before, I knew that. But I thought that if I just kept trying, if I was patient, the cracks would heal. Deborah was the kind of person who didn't wear her feelings on her sleeve. I thought I understood that. But I began to realize that her distance wasn't just about needing space, it was about her fear of being vulnerable. It was subtle, but over time, I started to see how much she compared me to some version of herself that I could never be. I wasn't as carefree as her, I didn't take life's uncertainties as easily as she did. I wanted to plan, I wanted to make things permanent. And for her, the constant tension between stability and freedom became too much. There was a night, a few months after we moved in together, that I saw the truth in her eyes. We had gone out for dinner, a simple night to reconnect after weeks of tension that had gone unnoticed by both of us. It was supposed to be a relaxed evening, but the air between us was thick with unspoken words. As we sat at the table, I looked across at her, waiting for her to speak, to say something that would bring us back to the place we once were. Instead, she just smiled softly, her gaze distant. "I'm not sure I can be everything you want me to be," she said quietly. The words hit me harder than anything she had ever said. I tried to laugh it off, to convince myself it was just a fleeting moment of doubt. But deep down, I knew. She had been pulling away for a reason, and I had been too afraid to see it. The more I tried to make her my anchor, the more I realized that she wasn't ready to be tied down. And that realization hit me hard. Deborah was everything I had wanted, everything I thought I needed. But in the end, she was a reminder of the lesson I had learned long ago: love, no matter how real it feels, is never as simple as we wish it could be. The day I found out wasn't supposed to be the day. It wasn't supposed to be that moment. I had been planning to spend the afternoon with Deborah, maybe talk about the wedding plans, maybe just have a quiet day together, like we used to. But that wasn't how it happened. It started with an innocent text. Deborah had sent me a quick message in the morning, saying she had an unexpected meeting she needed to attend. "No big deal," she said. She'd be home later. I wasn't alarmed. She had her work, and I had mine. We'd both gotten good at navigating the quiet spaces of our relationship, not demanding too much from each other. But something in me felt a little unsettled. It wasn't the first time she'd had these spontaneous meetings, but for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Still, I didn't think much of it. Until I found myself in the cafe later that afternoon. I had been running errands, nothing too exciting, just picking up some things for the apartment, and, on a whim, decided to grab a coffee at the cafe near our place. It was one of those familiar spots, the kind where you end up unintentionally bumping into someone you know. As I walked in, I didn't expect to see anyone familiar. I was still shaking off the strange sense of unease from earlier, my mind distracted by 100 different thoughts. But then, my gaze locked on them. There they were, Deborah and Jared. They were sitting together, side by side in the corner booth, too close. Laughing, joking, as if nothing had changed. It wasn't just the way they were sitting, either. It was the way she leaned toward him, the way her hand was resting on his. The intimacy in their actions was undeniable. It wasn't the kind of thing you could mistake for friendship. Not with the way she was looking at him, like there was something unspoken, something old and familiar between them. My chest tightened, a dull ache spreading across my ribcage as I stood frozen in the doorway. For a long moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. There were so many things I wanted to shout, so many questions I wanted to ask. But all I could feel was a deep, sinking emptiness. I didn't rush over. I didn't charge toward them. I didn't even say her name. Instead, I watched. I watched as they laughed, as Jared placed his hand on hers, as Deborah smiled in a way that made my stomach twist. I could feel my heart beginning to race, but it wasn't out of anger. Not yet. It was something else. Something deeper. It was a painful, hollow realization. One that spread like ice through my veins. I should have been furious. I should have felt rage. Instead, I felt like I was drowning. Not in the anger, but in the slow, suffocating awareness that I had been a fool. I had trusted her. I had believed in her, in us. I had let myself fall back into the fantasy of love, the one I had promised myself I would never believe in again. I had been so stupid. I could still hear her voice in my head, telling me about how she and Jared had parted ways, how she was so much better without him, how their past was just that. All of that, everything she had told me, was a lie. The realization hit me like a slap across the face. She had never really loved me. Not in the way I had loved her. Not in the way I had trusted her. She had never been fully mine. I had been the placeholder, the one she settled for when Jared wasn't around. When things were convenient. And he had been her real love, her true companion, the one she couldn't let go of. I watched them for a while longer. They didn't see me. They didn't even look up from their little world, cocooned in their private bubble. They looked so comfortable. So natural together. And that was the moment I realized that it wasn't just about their actions. It was about the way they had both manipulated me. Deborah, with her smiles and her gentle reassurances, making me believe that she was committed to me. Jared, with his quiet but insistent presence, always lurking just beneath the surface of our relationship. They had played their roles so well, so seamlessly, that I hadn't even realized I was being set up for this betrayal. My heart didn't break, not in the way I expected. It didn't shatter into 1,000 pieces that I could hold on to. It just emptied out. And as I stood there, watching them, I understood something with painful clarity. I wasn't just angry with them for what they were doing. I was angry with myself, for allowing myself to be so blind, so naive, for letting them both take advantage of the trust one had so carefully built around us. I wasn't the one who had been betrayed by her. I wasn't the one who had been fooled by him. I had betrayed myself. And that realization left me feeling like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into a dark, endless void. I didn't know what to do with myself, with the mess of emotions inside me. All I knew was that I had to leave. I had to walk away before I became someone I didn't recognize. I didn't confront them. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked out of that cafe, into the crisp air of the afternoon, as the weight of everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and trust began to collapse around me. What they had done wasn't just a betrayal of our relationship. It was a betrayal of everything I had believed in. And for the first time, I understood the depth of the lie they had both told me, the one that said I was enough. The days that followed were a blur. I went through the motions, still reeling from the sharp sting of betrayal. I tried to act normal, to carry on with life as usual, but there was a quiet anger inside me, a constant hum that never quite went away. It wasn't rage, not the kind I had imagined. It was deeper, quieter, more like a numbness that spread through my chest. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It didn't even hurt. No, the hardest part was that feeling of having been a fool, of having believed in something that was never really real to begin with. I spent the next few days trying to make sense of everything. I thought about confronting Deborah, about telling her that I knew what she'd done, about shouting, demanding an explanation. I thought about the anger I felt when I saw her with Jared, the betrayal that shook me to my core. But as the hours passed, something in me started to change. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that shouting, confronting her, or even trying to get revenge wouldn't give me what I needed. It wouldn't heal the wound, and it wouldn't give me back the piece of myself that I had lost. What I needed wasn't confrontation. What I needed was to take control. Not over her, not over Jared, but over myself. The more I replayed the scene in my mind, their laughter, their shared intimacy, the way they had looked at each other like nothing had ever changed, the more I understood that the real betrayal wasn't in their actions. It was in the way I had given them so much of myself, without ever considering what I needed in return. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to create a scene. I just needed to walk away. It took me 2 days before I finally found the courage to leave. It wasn't because I was scared. It wasn't because I was uncertain. It was because I realized that leaving wasn't about running away, it was about reclaiming my life. Reclaiming the peace that had been stolen from me, piece, by people who had never truly cared about me the way I had cared about them. I packed a bag. Just a small one, enough for a few days. I didn't tell Deborah. I didn't need to. I wasn't going to ask for explanations anymore. I had nothing left to ask for. The hardest part wasn't the moment I left. It was the weight of my own reflection as I looked in the mirror before I walked out the door. For a long time, I had lived my life through other people's expectations, through the belief that love was something that could be measured by loyalty, by commitment. But now, standing there, I realized that I had never really understood what loyalty meant. I had been loyal to Deborah, yes, but I had never been loyal to myself. I had given everything I had to someone who didn't deserve it. That was the turning point for me. The realization that the only loyalty that truly mattered was the loyalty I had to myself. I left the apartment. I didn't look back. The city felt different, somehow, as I walked through the streets. The air was crisper, the sounds of traffic louder, and yet there was a sense of clarity in everything. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't go to a hotel or call a friend. I didn't need anyone to hold me up, to reassure me. I just needed space. I needed time to think. So I took a long walk, letting the hours slip away, the city surrounding me in a way that felt strangely comforting. I had always been the kind of person who found comfort in solitude, but I had forgotten how good it could feel, how freeing it could be to be alone with my thoughts. After a while, I found myself sitting at a bar. The kind of place where the lights were dim, and the noise was just enough to keep you from feeling too isolated. I ordered a drink, not to forget, but to mark the occasion. To remind myself that this was a turning point, that I was walking away not because I was defeated, but because I had finally regained control over my own life. I could feel my anger start to melt away. The longer I sat there, the more I realized that this wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about proving anything to Deborah, to Jared, or even to myself. It was about finding peace again. It was about accepting that I couldn't control what had happened, but I could control how I responded to it. And that, in itself, was enough. Later that evening, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I reached out to an old friend. Not for support, but just to reconnect, to remind myself that I wasn't alone. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a simple text, asking if she wanted to grab coffee sometime. But it was enough to break through the isolation I had been living in for so long. When I returned to the apartment, I didn't feel that gnawing emptiness inside me anymore. I felt calm. I had made the decision to leave, to step away, and in doing so, I had regained something I hadn't realized I had lost, my sense of self. My ability to stand firm in who I was, without relying on someone else to define me. Deborah came home later that night. I didn't wait for her to speak. I didn't need to hear her apologies, her explanations, her excuses. I was done with all of it. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steady but final. "I'm not coming back." She froze, her eyes wide, but I didn't give her a chance to respond. I just walked out, leaving the apartment behind. And with it, I left the weight of the last 2 years, the pain, the disappointment, and the guilt. It wasn't about making her feel anything. It wasn't about revenge or punishing her. It was about finding my own freedom. And in that moment, I realized that the silence I had walked into, leaving behind the chaos, the lies, the love that wasn't real, was the loudest statement I could make. I wasn't broken. I wasn't lost. I was free. And that, in itself, was all I needed. It's strange how time has a way of reshaping everything. A few months ago, I would have believed that nothing could change the way I felt. I thought the betrayal, the hurt, would leave permanent marks on me, shaping the way I looked at love, at trust, and at myself. But here I am, sitting on a bench in the park on a quiet Sunday morning, with the cool breeze in my face and the sun barely making its way through the clouds. And for the first time in what feels like forever, I feel at peace. I can still remember the weight of those early days, the days when I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, the days when every corner of the apartment felt like a reminder of the lies, the betrayal. But with time, I've realized something: I didn't need anyone to make me whole. The truth is, I had been searching for validation outside myself for so long. I'd believed that love, in the form of another person, would complete me, would show me my worth. I thought that I needed someone else to anchor me. But now, I know better. I'm different now, not because I got revenge, not because I made some grand gesture to prove a point. No, I'm different because I finally stopped searching for my worth in other people's hands. I finally stopped giving pieces of myself to people who weren't worthy of them. The silence that followed my departure from Deborah, the solitude that filled my days afterward, wasn't the painful emptiness I expected. It was space, a space I needed to rebuild myself. It wasn't about forgetting the past, or pretending it never happened. I don't think I'll ever fully erase what Deborah and Jared did to me. But I've learned that the past doesn't have to dictate who I am now. I've come to terms with my mistakes, the way I had ignored the signs, the way I had let myself believe that love meant giving up parts of myself. And I've forgiven myself for it. I needed to make that mistake to realize that love isn't about losing yourself. It's about finding a partner who helps you grow, but never asks you to shrink. I've learned to stand on my own. To take responsibility for my own happiness. I've found joy in little things, in moments of stillness and clarity. I've started painting again. Something I used to do often before life got complicated. There's a quiet joy in creating something from scratch, in expressing what I feel through colors and strokes. It's something that reminds me of who I am, independent of anyone else's expectations. But I'm not blind to the fact that I still carry pieces of the past with me. The hurt doesn't disappear overnight, nor does the sting of betrayal. It's there, in quiet moments when my mind wanders, when I think about what could have been, what might have happened if things had gone differently. There are days when I still question myself, when I wonder if I'll ever fully trust anyone again, when I feel a pang of sadness that Deborah and I couldn't make it work. But even in those moments, I don't feel hopeless anymore. I feel human. I feel like I'm learning to trust again, to rebuild my belief in others without losing myself in the process. And that's the most important thing I've learned: love doesn't complete you. It doesn't heal you. You have to do that for yourself. You have to learn to stand on your own, to find happiness and fulfillment in who you are, not in who someone else thinks you should be. I've learned that my worth doesn't depend on a relationship, on how someone else feels about me. My worth is something that starts and ends with me. I'm not defined by the people who come and go from my life, or by the love that's lost. I'm defined by my ability to keep going, to find meaning in the moments that don't involve anyone else. So, yeah. I'm different now. Not because I've fully let go of the past, I haven't. But because I've realized that the past doesn't hold power over me anymore. I'm free of it. I'm free to be who I am without apologies. And that's the most important thing I could have learned. And as I sit here, watching the world go by, I realize that for the first time in a long time, I'm not looking for someone else to complete me. I'm whole, just as I am.